As expected, their mission was a success and with minimal casualties. The report said that, as his soldiers were killed off, he hid in his tent like a coward. He hardly even put up much of a fight as he was dragged back to base. The poor bastard was now being interrogated by one of HFY's top soldiers. Meek was told that the prisoner was already spilling the beans on what he knew, so the old general decided to take a look for himself. Upon entering the room, he saw the prisoner tied up in a chair, with Lord Luca standing to the side. My, Luca, you barely touched him. I don't think he's even bleeding. It didn't take much, my lord. A small beating here, some empty promises of letting him go if he talked there, was all that was needed to make this coward talk. I didn't even get to use my acid. HFY looked over the Dakar more closely. The only damage on him was a bruised eye, and he appeared to have wet himself. He wondered how someone like that would be allowed to be in charge of anyone, let alone become an officer. HFY grabbed him by the snout and forced him to make eye contact. He then began to speak into Karen. Now, tell me what you told him, and I'll see what I can do to get you out of here alive. HFY knew that wouldn't be possible even for him, but he thought it would loosen the prisoner's lips a bit. There's a project that's been under development since the war started. I don't know exactly what it is, but apparently it's supposed to be able to give us the resources to win the war. Is it some kind of weapon? Is it near completion? If so, how long until it is complete? Like I said, I have no idea. That's all I know. Now, please, can I leave? My family's rather wealthy. I'm sure we can make it worth your while. I'm not just some common foot soldier. We come from a distinguished line. HFY pondered for a few moments, taking his hands off of the Dakar. He seemed to be speaking the truth. If so, there'd be much work to do. Whatever this project was, it needed to be stopped, and soon at that. He would have to report this as soon as his messenger returned from the capital. If that's all, then I'm done here. Luca, deal with our little friend here, and be sure to be quick about it. With pleasure, my lord. HFY didn't share the same hatred of the Dakar as the other Veek did. If anything, he felt sorry for the poor bastards. If his sympathies were ever found out, however, he'd surely be killed without a second thought. A quick death was the best mercy he could offer any Dakar. As he left the room, HFY could hear soft sobbing quickly cut off by cracking a bone, as the Dakar's neck was ungraciously snapped. What a pathetic end, he thought to himself, closing the door behind him. They had been brought to a room in a temporary structure. It wasn't much, but it had beds and a place to store things at least. Harsh was quick to get some sleep, but Chilukik couldn't manage any. Chilukik guessed it would take at least a day or two for the humans to get a linguist here, so they would probably be waiting in there for a while. So after only an hour or two, Chilukik was surprised when his door was unlocked and creaked open. Two humans stepped in quietly, obviously trying to be sneaky. They seemed to be sniggering at something as one of them held up a bottle of dark liquid. The one with the bottle walked up to Chilukik and took a swig from it, before holding the bottle up to his face. The intention was clear. Chilukik grabbed the neck of the bottle and went for a sip. As soon as the bottle touched his lips, the human tipped the bottle up, forcing him to drink way more than he intended. Liquor rushed into his throat. A burning sensation felt all the way down. Chilukik pushed the bottle away, coughing and spluttering. The humans broke out laughing as he tried to regain himself. He hadn't had something that strong in years. Nowadays, liquor was a rare and expensive luxury. If a couple of belligerent soldiers were able to get their hands on a bottle that big, it must be a commodity here. Chilukik decided to wake Harshtalk, but before he could, he was grabbed and dragged out of the room. Chilukik thought it best not to resist, lest he anger the drunken soldiers. They led him to a secluded area on the base, in between a couple large tents. On the ground lay two sets of padded gear, one coloured red, the other blue. One of the soldiers ran over to the red set and began to put it on, while the other led Chilukik to the blue set. Chilukik looked down at the gear. It consisted of a padded helmet, a thick vest of some sort, groin protection, and a padded stick. Was this gear for some kind of sport? If so, Chilukik had no clue what that sport would entail, just judging by the equipment alone. The soldier grabbed the vest and held it up to Chilukik. The vest went on without too much trouble, however it was quite small on him. The groin protection seemed to go on well enough at first, but then his tail got in the way, forcing it to hang low in his waist. Finally, the helmet did not fit in the slightest. Seeing this, the soldier that was assisting him with the gear shrugged and threw the helmet to the side. He then picked up the padded stick and handed it to Chilukik, saying something in his foreign tongue. Chilukik was then moved so that he was standing a few meters in front of the other soldier, who was now fully dressed in the gear. The point of the sport slowly began to dawn on Chilukik. This was a dueling sport. The young soldier stood off to the side and raised his hand. This was not good. Chilukik had never been in a real fight before, and judging by what he'd seen of humans, they were considerably tougher than any Dakar. Wait, hold on now. I don't think this is a good idea, he tried to say. Chilukik's pleas were not understood, though he doubted that would have mattered, as the soldier brought his hand down and the match began. The geared soldier began charging at him. Despite this being the most terrifying thing he'd seen, he had to think, and quickly. The first thing to do was to get out of the way, as he'd already experienced what happens when you're in the way of a charging koollman. Thankfully, he was quick enough, and the soldier ran right past him. Chilukik now had the advantage. He had the soldier's back. He lifted up his stick and brought it down as hard as he could on the human. The strike was ineffective, only causing the soldier to swing around with his own strike, which knocked Chilukik's stick from his hands. Now that he was completely open, the soldier went for a final blow. Chilukik could only wonder how things could get so turned around so quickly, as the stick connected with his head. God damn it, Burdine, I said no headshots! Tanner ran over to the alien, who was now laying on his back, not moving. As he knelt down by his side, he could see blood trickling from his snout. A few small taps on the side of his head caused the Dakar to open his eyes and say something. At least he's still conscious, Tanner thought, as he stood up. Looking over at Burdine, he could see that he was standing at parade rest in front of Campos, who had a death stare. Tanner was quick to join Burdine's side, the situation slowly getting worse. Campos pinched the bridge of his nose in disappointment. Do I really have to ask? Obviously no one has seen you yet, so maybe there's still a chance we can unfuck this. First, tell me how the fuck you snuck him out. The two looked at each other for a moment before Burdine answered. The duty had fallen asleep. So you decided it was a good idea to kidnap him? To play pupil sticks? Campos's voice was getting sort of loud. If they didn't calm him soon, he'd attract unwanted attention. Tanner was about to speak up when Burdine was knocked down from behind. It was underhanded, sure, but so was forcing him into a duel. Chilukik stood over the soldier and hit him one more time for good measure. The other two just stared at him with more than a little surprise. Chilukik realized his adrenaline-fueled revenge assault may not have been the best idea. He swiftly stepped back and laid the stick at his feet. The one that addressed him originally held him out of the gear while the other two conversed. Chilukik was then quickly rushed back to his room where Harshot was waiting with a worried look at his face. What did they do to you? Why are you bleeding? It's a long story. Some drunk soldiers took me away to play some sort of dueling sport. It got a little out of hand, I suppose. Are you going to report them? This is definitely a considerably large infraction. I mean, insulting a diplomat. I don't think it would be in our best interests. It could stir up something that would not be ideal. Besides, it wasn't really assault if it was just a game. Though it is a bit concerning that they were able to just sneak into here. Chilukik reached into his coat and grabbed a handkerchief to clean the blood from his face. He had to admit that he had a bit of fun, though he would have to report any more impromptu cultural exchanges. Chilukik decided it was best to get some rest. The coming days would likely be strenuous on his sleep. He curled up into his bed and slowly drifted off. Good morning, General. Agent Himrod said while stepping in holding a stack of papers. After the recent arrivals, a meeting was called to decide what the next course of action was going to be. Unlike last time, however, they seemed to want to cooperate. Everton took a sip of his coffee. Good morning, Agent. Himrod walked up to the General's desk and took a seat. She then slid the paperwork onto the desk and spoke. How are our guests doing? Nothing of note yet. They're being checked on every hour. The agent looked up at the General. Good. Have they been able to walk around yet? No. I feel we should wait until we have established a proper base of communication first. Himrod nodded her head in agreement. For once they weren't in conflict about something. She leaned forward and tapped on the papers. This is the paperwork to transfer them to Ilsen. I know you prefer to keep everything here, but the fact of the matter is, we don't have the resources here to undertake something like this. The General pondered on it for a minute or two. It wasn't ideal. Things never were, though it was probably the most practical. They were given a month before word of the Dakar would be given to the general public, and it would look good to have already begun communicating. As much as he hated to put his responsibilities in someone else's hands, there were deadlines to be made. You're right. I don't like it, not in the slightest. But if that's what it takes, then it has my signature. The general slid the paperwork towards him and began signing it. Himra smiled to herself. Finally, some progress. Hartosh found it hard to get sleep. At least he wasn't alone this time. Chalukik lay on his bed, curled up in a ball. Are you awake? Chalukik breathed deeply before answering. I am. I assume you're having trouble sleeping as well? Bad memories have been rearing their head as of late. Chalukik sat up and stretched a bit. He then turned to face Harstock, letting his legs off the side of the bed. Memories from the last time you were here? Hartosh softly shook his head. No, memories from long ago. Back in Chibus. I lost a few friends, a few right in front of me. I'm sorry to hear about that you had to go through that. Hartosh looked up at Chalukik to meet his eyes. Don't be. Like I said, it was a long time ago. Besides, those experiences made me a stronger person overall, and they serve as a reminder. A reminder of what? Why we're here. Why you kept at your project for so long. Why I agreed to come with you. It's a reminder of what we need to stop. I used to think that they died for little. They died to delay the inevitable doom of our species. But I've realized something. It was slow at first. It didn't really dawn on me until you gave me that speech back at Fort Chazier. They died to buy us time. They gave you time to build your portal. They gave us time to find a solution to the impossible. They're the reason we're here, and I'll be damned if I let their deaths be in vain. That's why I agreed to come. Hartosh stopped to breathe for a moment or two. There was a lot to finally get off his chest. And now that he'd put it into words, he felt better about it. He finally felt that he had some form of control over his future. He was hardly used to the feeling. They sat in silence for several minutes before a knock was heard from the door. The two stood up as the door opened and the human soldier walked in. He looked at the two and spoke. Harstock listened closely to see if he could make out any words. I think I heard something about someone being transported somewhere. Maybe he means us. Chalukik turned and picked up his bag. Well, if that's the case, then there's no point in leaving our stuff here. Hartosh shrugged and grabbed his own backpack, strapping it to his back. Once they were both ready, the human stepped to the side and gestured to them to leave the room. They were then led outside, where a flying machine was waiting for them. The machine was already revved up and produced a deafening howl. They stood several meters from it, and were told to wait. After a minute or two, a human exited the machine, holding something in each of his hands. Hartosh had no indication as to what it was. All he could tell was that a mess of wires were attached to it. Once the human ran up to them, he handed an object to each of them. He then pointed to the helmet he was wearing, which had an indent similar in shape to the object's. Hartosh put the device over his ears, to which the human gave a nod and a thumbs up. After Chalukik did the same thing, the human motioned for them to follow him to the machine. As they got closer, the human gently pushed their head down to avoid the spinning rotor. Hartosh could hardly believe it. They were really about to fly. Once in the machine, they were strapped into their seats, which they hardly fit in. After a few moments, the machine revved and slowly lifted off the ground. Hartosh heard a voice he thought was coming from his head. By the gods, we're flying! We're really flying! Was that Chalukik? But that's impossible. There was no way he'd be able to hear him over all this noise, especially with the device over his ears. The device? That must be what it does. Hartosh spoke. He wondered if it worked both ways. Chalukik? Chalukik, can you hear me? Chalukik winced in pain and grabbed his ear. Ah, yes, I can hear you plenty. No need to shout. After they gained a bit of altitude, the machine tilted forward, and they began accelerating quickly. Sorry, I guess this thing is very sensitive. Hartosh looked outside the machine. They were moving fast. Sickeningly fast. Not even a Veek could fly this fast normally. They were the first car to ever fly, and they were going faster than any Veek. Hartosh turned to Chalukik, who was also staring outside. This is amazing. By the gods, we're really flying. Chalukik turned around to face Harstock. He did not look like he was having as great of a time. I think I'm going to be sick. Jaquir sat in his office flipping through a book. After he moved his operation to New Hope, things were quiet. Every once in a while someone spotted a human patrol, and of course that would stir the base up, but it would usually die down after an hour or so. It had been 2 weeks since Chalukik and Harstock left, when an urgent knock came to his door. Jaquir stood up annoyed, and slowly walked over to answer the door. On the other side stood a lowly infantry soldier. Yes, what is it? It better be important. Yes, sir, it is. There was another human sight. Let me stop you right there. Jaquir interrupted. I thought I said it better be important. Yes, sir. This one was different. They dropped something off, and it's addressed to you. The soldier picked up a box and held it out in front of Jaquir. He grabbed the box and looked at it. Sure enough, written on the top was his name and who had sent it. It was from Chalukik. Jaquir closed the door and brought the box to his desk. Upon opening it, he found 2 letters and a bag made out of a strange material. The bag was stuffed with something and had human writing on it. Jaquir thought that maybe one of the letters would explain it, so he looked at those next. One was addressed to the matriarch, the other to himself. He opened the one addressed to him and unfolded the paper inside. My dear friend Jaquir, the mission has gone to plan accordingly, and we have established more than just a base of communication. I have yet to tell them why we are here or how we got here. However, I have made it clear that we are interested in trading for rations, an example of which I have sent along with this letter. They seem to be very interested in everything about us. I must admit I feel the same about them. Perhaps we can use this to our advantage. Their help in exchange for information. I don't believe we are at that level of communication yet, however. I'll keep you updated. In other news, Hartosh has been a huge help. His previous knowledge has come in handy, as well as his steely determination. I expected nothing less from a scout of our army. The technology that we've seen is unimaginable. You'd think me crazed if I were to tell you by letter. I hope someday you can witness it yourself. You'll hear from me again soon. Sincerely, Chalukik.